Are you sick and tired of the way things are going in the great United States of America? Try moving to Denmark. We have Greenland, free healthcare, low corruption. So, what are you waiting for? Try moving to Denmark now. Right, sorry. That was a little bit, anyway, on a more serious note, I do think that our little country, Denmark, has received a lot of attention in the United States of America lately, mainly due to how Trump wants to purchase Greenland. And with all the other good stuff going on over there, perhaps some of you are realizing that there might be nicer places out in the world to live. And one of those places might be Denmark. So today I'll share some of the fantastic things that you could get and be a part of if you move to Denmark, but also the more negative side and perhaps what you would be missing out on if you were to leave the US. Oh, and as a disclaimer, obviously it is a little bit ridiculous to directly compare our little country with 6 million inhabitants to all of the US. But I'm still going to do it, if anything, just for a little bit of fun, and perhaps you can learn a thing or two about our tiny country. So let's just jump right in and talk about free education. In Denmark, basically all education is free. And in fact, for us here in Denmark, it is just a little bit ridiculous how you guys in the US send all your newly graduates out into the workforce hugely in debt. That won't happen here. In fact, when you go to university, you actually get paid to study. Now, it depends a little bit on your situation, how much you get paid, but it's around $1,000 per month to go to university. Now, Denmark is a bit of an expensive country, so for most students, that's not quite enough to live on. So most people that I know, and myself included, would also work a part-time job while studying through university. And the norm is like working 15 to 20 hours per week besides your studies as well. I think this is especially true if you live in Copenhagen because it's just so expensive to live there. Now, of course, the money that we pay to all the students have to come from somewhere. And of course, it comes through taxes. And that's our first negative thing that you would encounter when you move to Denmark. Higher taxes. Now, you can't really say like a exact amount of taxes that we pay in Denmark because it's actually really complicated. Our whole tax system, which is also kind of stupid, but generally it's around 40 to 50% personal income tax. But again, it depends. And of course, besides that, we have a 25% VAT on all products. And then there are various other taxes on different products. So it's just we pay a lot in taxes. Now, of course, they've done a lot of studies around this on asking the Danes how they feel about paying so high taxes. And generally, most people here are actually quite okay with the amount of taxes that we pay. Of course, everyone wants to pay a little bit less, but on the whole, people think that they get their money's worth for what they pay in taxes. Now, our little infomercial guy in the beginning mentioned low corruption. And actually, according to the Corruption Perceptions Index, Denmark is the least corrupt country in the whole world. And the US is number 28 on that list. I think a little bonus positive I can tag on like the low corruption is generally just that there's a high level of trust here in Denmark, both to our officials, to our institutions, but also just in each other. Of course, things are not perfect, but on a relative scale, it's probably all right here. And since we are talking about like politicians and our institutions, another positive is that Denmark is not run by oligarchs. I'm sure there are some wealthy people who lobby and have some influence, but it's just nowhere near as bad as it is in the US and other countries too. It's actually a very Danish thing to just complain. We complain about everything, and we especially love to complain about our politicians, especially if it's a party you don't like who are in government. But I think for a lot of people here in Denmark, since Trump came to power in the US, we're like, okay, we don't have it that bad. But of course, things are not perfect here either. And I mean, a fun example that just happened recently, that the government raised the retirement age in order to get like the public pension here up to 70 years old. And I mean, for me, and of course it's like progressive, so for me it's like 73 or 74 before I can retire. But the only exception to that list is politicians. They can retire when they're 60. That feels like a very, I don't know, American politician move to me and not a very Danish move. So we do get that here sometime too. But of course, a negative to all of this free educations, our politicians and all that, is that Denmark is a communist country, right? But of course, I mean, that's not really the case here. We have a free market democracy. Of course, it's more social democracy, we call it, where the state is a little bit larger. And of course, we pay a bit more taxes, but then we get free education and other cool stuff that we might talk about. But in most ways, I mean, we are very similar to the United States. Capitalism rules the world, baby. Oh, and by the way, my name is Adam and I make videos about my life here in Denmark. Everything from travel guides to me exploring my home country, showcasing cool and unique places here, to renovating my 125-year-old Danish house. So consider subscribing if you're interested in how life is here in Denmark. We don't just have low corruption here in Denmark, we also have very low inequality. One of the lowest in the whole world, actually. Again. And I do think that the rising inequality, that's not really a good thing. I mean, those crazy rich oligarchs, they are just getting even richer. And your average Joe, is he getting a lot richer? Not really. But at least here in Denmark, the distance from top to bottom is not that large, and most people are just in the middle, living a pretty good life here. Again, this is probably also one of those things that is just a little bit easier when you only have 6 million people to worry about. Especially on a global scale, I mean, here in Denmark, you are living a very good life, even if you're just in the regular middle class here. But a negative to this point is that here in Denmark, you likely won't become a billionaire. We don't really have a lot of those here. And I guess some of those rich people, they also like to move to Switzerland or something to pay less taxes. But I guess it is just harder to become extremely rich here in Denmark because you pay a lot of taxes. Another great thing, and I guess that only expands on the whole low inequality thing, is that there are just a lot of, I guess, safety nets in Denmark. Again, thanks probably to the welfare state and our social democracy here. There are a lot of schemes and programs to help people, I guess, not fall through the floor. And I guess on a more personal level, because I am self-employed, started my own business, and I think just knowing that a lot of these safety net exists, I guess just made that leap a little bit easier, knowing that if everything blows off, if my business completely fails, I'll probably still be all right. But a negative, if you are like a skilled worker, you probably won't get as high a salary here in Denmark as you would in the US. Now, I actually think that the average salary is higher in Denmark than the US. But again, that inequality thing, most people in Denmark earn pretty close to the median. Whereas in the US, I think that gap is a little bit higher. Like an example you often see on the internet is how McDonald's workers here in Denmark are actually getting paid a pretty good wage. Like if that's your full-time job, you can live a pretty good life here. And it's kind of funny because we don't even have, like, by law, any kind of minimum wage here in Denmark. However, unions are pretty big and have quite a bit of power here in Denmark. And so I guess there are more the union specifics minimum wages. And of course, those affect industries which perhaps aren't governed by a union. But on the flip side, if you are like a really skilled in whatever you do, working for an American company could probably earn you a lot more money. Like actually recently I talked to a guy who works on like offshore windmill farms, and he works for a Danish company, and he works with people from all over the world. And he told me that he had a colleague who worked for a US company, and they were doing basically the exact same job, and the guy from the US company was earning almost 3 times his salary. So there you go. Work-life balance is a big thing here in Denmark, both for just everyday people but also for companies, because if they want to attract the best employees, they have to offer some great benefits. Of course, we do work a lot. I guess the average work week is 37 or 40 hours. But making space for your life as well is really important for people. Also when choosing their job. So, if their kid is sick or if they have to pick them up early, is the job flexible to allow for that? They ask you to work overtime a lot or not, and things like that. Another pretty great thing is the maternity leave here. And the reason I mention that is because my girlfriend Sally and I just recently had our little baby. But in Denmark you get 52 weeks of paid parental leave. And that's 52 weeks for the parents combined. And then some of it is like mandated. The mom has to have a certain amount of it and the dad a certain amount of those weeks. But for us, since we're both self-employed, we can actually use those weeks basically how we want. So I can transfer some of my weeks to Sally or the other way around. But I mean, like really, that's like a whole year you get paid to take care of your kid, so you don't have to ship them off to kindergarten or whatever when they're a few months old. Of course, another big thing that we get for our taxes is free healthcare. Again, you get free healthcare. You don't have to worry if you get sick. You won't, or have to take an ambulance if you have a stroke or something. You're not gonna end up in debt for the rest of your life. And again, for us Danes, and I guess for just most Europeans, really, it's crazy how in the US you can build a healthcare system that's basically built around profit. It's crazy. Like our baby, he was born 7 weeks early, so we spent actually 1 whole month, all 3 of us, in the hospital. We didn't pay anything for that. And while we were in the hospital, I was like looking a lot like in forums and Reddit and so on for, I guess, premature babies. And there were just so many posts from Americans kind of asking, how are you guys paying for all of this? Because if the same happens to you, like in the US, you better have insurance. And even if you have insurance, I mean, you might still have to pay several $1,000s for the premium, I guess. And if you don't have insurance, I mean, you're just screwed. And I am getting cat hair everywhere. But a pretty bad thing about Denmark here, at least in my opinion, is the nature. It's just really boring. And I mean, of course, we are a small country, but it's just completely flat. And I think it's like 80% or more than 80% of all land in Denmark is just farmland. Of course, there are some cool places to visit and see with some cool nature experiences. On the whole, it's just so boring. And especially compared to the US, you guys win that by a mile. But I guess a counter positive could be that we're in Europe. Everything is pretty close. So I mean, we can just take a drive up to Sweden or Norway or fly down to Italy or France, and we get completely different climate, completely different landscapes, and in particular a different culture. But a little positive, I guess that's related to our nature and landscape. And it's a fun fact as well, I guess, is that no matter where you are in Denmark, you're never more than 50 kilometers from the water. So that's pretty cool. And I mean, there are a lot of cool beaches here in Denmark. Again, it's just when you've seen one, you've kind of seen them all. Another negative is, I guess, the Danish language. Especially if you are coming from America, learning Danish is pretty hard. Like, it's just a weird language and a hard language to learn. And if you do want to move here, learning Danish is a pretty good idea. Now, everyone speaks pretty good English. Of course, if you want to be more integrated into society and just even for getting a job, it is a really big plus if you know how to speak Danish. And for a lot of jobs, it's like mandatory. So you would have to get really invested into learning the Danish language and really commit to learning a language that only 6 million people speak. And just generalizing a little bit about the Danish people, I guess we are perhaps a little bit more closed off and not as overly friendly perhaps as Americans usually are. It can also be quite hard to make friends with a Dane, especially if you are a foreigner in Denmark. At least that's what I hear from all the foreigners I speak to who are living here in Denmark, is that they just have a pretty hard time making long-lasting Danish friends. And there are most likely a lot of reasons for that I just don't have time to get into in this video. But of course, it's something to be aware of. It's also just, you don't like greet random people or small talk on the bus or with the waiter at the restaurant. Those things are just pretty weird. But speaking of restaurants, a big positive, at least for me, is that the tipping culture in Denmark is just so much better than the US. I really can't stand it. Like mandatory 30% tips or whatever. Here in Denmark, you tip if you want to, if you think you had great service, but it's not expected. Generally, people working in restaurants get paid a living wage, so they don't rely on the tips, it's just a little extra bonus. But now to a pretty big negative for some of you Americans. Guns are legal. You can't have your guns here. Now, of course, you can't get gun permits if you use them for hunting or whatever, but as a whole, you can't have your guns here. Sorry. And another pretty bad thing for you guys, cars are really expensive here. We just have an insane tax on cars in Denmark. Again, it depends on the price of the car, but like for a lot of cars, it's around 100% tax once it crosses the border into Denmark. Now, on the positive side of that, if you live in Copenhagen or one of the major cities here, you might not even need a car because public transportation is just so good and a lot of people just take their bicycle. But if you live more out in the countryside, you really do need a car. But if I have sold you now on the dream of moving to Denmark, is it actually possible for you? And the tough answer is that it's actually really quite hard and a little bit complicated. If you're a student, you could pretty easily come study here. If your partner is Danish, there is a path. Or if you work like an in-demand job, your chances of coming here are also higher. So it's possible, but difficult. And I would probably need a whole video just to go more in depth about how you could actually go about doing it. So if you're interested in seeing that, that is something I can do. Perhaps talk to some expert or even some Americans who have gone through it and their experience moving to Denmark. And perhaps if you are an American living here in Denmark, did I miss anything on this list? I would love to hear from you down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.